as we think about some of these things, I love the church. And I know that there's a famous quote by John Allen, who's a former presiding bishop of the Episcopal Church in the United States. Presiding Bishop Allen once said, "I'm guilty of loving the church more than the Lord of the church." So when I say I love the church, I don't just mean I love the institutional system and I love it above the Lord Jesus. I've been profoundly changed by Jesus, profoundly affected, and have strived to walk with him for 32 years now. And so as a follower of Jesus and a believer in the gospel, I also see that the church, his body, is a beautiful thing. And I've given myself in my energies and my work and my labor towards it. And let me tell you, there are some things that happen in the church that are deeply frustrating and painful. I'm currently overseeing an investigation into abuse in another diocese in the ACNA. Very, very painful, hurtful. So I recognize the fragility of the church, but I also see the beauty of the church. And I do believe that the church is the vehicle by which God is making what we talked about earlier. This beautiful, big, diverse, bold family, the body of Christ from every tribe, tongue, people, and nation. So that's my outcome. I want to talk about some 4 questions for you and allow you guys to interact with me on it from your point of view. And the 4 questions come from my readings of a church historian named Rodney Stark. Does anyone know the work of Rodney Stark? Rodney's a PhD at Baylor University in the United States and was converted to Christianity by actually studying church history. Shocker. And has written extensively on a number of things recently. But Rodney Stark said that there were 3, I've added a 4th nuance, there were 3 things that he noticed about how the church survived. And in some ways, I think the title of his book, How the Church Won the Roman Empire, or something like that. And so 3 things, I'm adding a 4th. He said that the church, in its age and day, outloved its culture, outthought its culture, and outlived its culture. And I would add the 4th, it outlasted its culture. So the church isn't necessarily supposed to be anti-cultural. It's a product of its culture. It's ingrained in its culture. Jesus said, "You are in the world, but you are not of the world." You're British citizens, or if you're citizens of another country on loan to Britain, however it is, I'm a citizen of the United States. I'm a product of my culture, but that's not all about me. So let's do these 4 things again. How does the church, for you, in your day, in your locality, outlove the culture, outthink the culture, outlive the culture, and outlast the culture? Okay? So those are the 4 things for us. And I know it's late in the afternoon, so if you need to sleep, feel no shame or guilt. But I want to address, from my point of view, how we're wrestling with this in my locality, how we're thinking through these things. So I'll start with outlive the culture. The trend in the United States is this: people are marrying later and having less children. People ask me, "Why have you had 5 children?" And I said, "Because we didn't want 6. So why did we have a big family? Because I want more people who have the opportunity to be formed in the Christian faith. Now, I cannot control what my children believe. But I wanted a larger family because I believe that's what God does, is he's building a family. So we wanted to outlive the culture. We wanted to be able to say, there's more of us left. There's more of us as Christians. So there is a reality that the church has grown through demographic growth. And that's actually not wrong. God said to Adam and Eve, be fruitful and multiply. He repeated it to Noah in Genesis chapter 9. So there is this sense that the church, by reproducing itself biologically and spiritually, outlives its culture. So we talk about the importance of God's family, but also biological families. And we also talk about the importance of people who aren't called to be married, who are single people, participating in that family as well. So we want to outlive our culture. That's not the trend in the United States. I imagine it's probably similar in the UK, if not. So most people in the United States today, 40 years ago, they got married by age 22. Today it's 31. They're waiting longer and they're having less children. So the culture of the day in the United States will not live very long. And that's good news. Whatever we see about the culture and say, this isn't right, this isn't good, it's not going to be around much longer. It won't outlive itself. In fact, biological growth in the United States is primarily happening through the immigration of Hispanic peoples to the U.S. Folks coming from south of our border are the ones who are having children and families. So there is that sense of outliving our culture, biologically and spiritually. That's the things that we're wrestling with in our context. The second thing is outthinking our culture. One of the problems of the technological culture today is we can't talk or sustain deep conversations for more than 5 minutes. So this is what I wanted us to see in Acts chapter 11. That the leaders there, Paul and Barnabas, taught. There is an importance of today that we have to have a primacy of the ministry of teaching. There's a confusion in North America. There's a confusion about all kinds of things. Human sexuality is the biggest one. So the church can often take this posture. We don't want to get into controversial issues and make people upset. Actually, the church should be teaching about human sexuality and should be bringing to this conversation the best of the best thinking. This is what we saw in the early centuries with the rise of the apologists and the church fathers. Why do you think those kinds of leaders emerged in their time? They actually had compelling answers. And their compelling answers were able to say, the culture thinks this way, let me tell you where that's going to go. Let me tell you the logical conclusions of confusion about human sexuality and out-thought the culture of the day. That's what we're having to do in North America. We're going to dial in on robust teaching for people. It's not just enough to say, read this book, but it takes leaders who actually catechize their people. The rise of the catechism in human history, in church history, has come in periods of great confusion. So one of the things that the Anglican Church in North America did, we're not the brightest and the best of Anglicans in the world. There's challenges in our midst, but we produced a catechism. And that catechism has actually seen people say, I've never heard this before. I've never thought this before. I'm hungry for more. 2 Sundays ago in my own church, I confirmed 39 adults and teenagers. 39. And they had gone through, as I mentioned, about an 18-month process towards confirmation. We call that process the catechumenate. Anyone heard that before? Nothing new under the sun. If you do not teach and help people love the Lord with their minds and think deeply about the things of God, then they have a shallow, fragile faith. And when circumstances of trial and challenge come, they're like the soil scattered on the path. It easily fades away. So how do we outthink our culture? Our culture today in North America catechizes people. That catechism starts whenever someone wakes up and they pick up a device and they start reading their device. And by the end of the day, the average North American has seen 8 hours of screen time. 8 hours. And then we think a 5 to 10 minute sermon on Sundays is going to compete with that. It does not compete with that. How do you outthink your culture? How do you bring to bear robust theological education and teaching so that people are not carried to and fro, as Timothy says, Paul says to Timothy? The third thing is love our culture. So I've watched generational changes in the United States. I'm what's called a Gen Xer. I was born in 1970. I'm 52 years old. And I have seen this with the generations below me. They care more about what I do than what I say. Think about the impact of that. They measure what I do more than what I say. So if I'm not following Christ and striving in the power of the Spirit, in the weakness and frailties that I have, Paul says that God's grace is sufficient in my weaknesses, and I feel them greatly, especially the older I get. If I'm not loving my neighbor as myself, and my neighbor might be my family members first, it doesn't matter what I'm saying with my mouth. My actions demonstrate that. Does the church have compassion on the culture that it's in? Calvin, I think that's one of the things that you said from your recap of your group. I actually think there's a lot of things taught in my culture that give me the heebie-jeebies. I don't know if that translates into British English, but it bothers me. It scares me. I don't like it. It's untruth. And yet, I'm not the person who wants to stand on the corner condemning the culture for being true to its ethic of relativism. Do I love the culture? Do I love the people? Do I serve and bless them? Or do I stand back critiquing them and saying, isn't it awful what's happened here in, you fill in the city name? Do I love them? This is what we saw happen in Church of the Redeemer. I'll share a story about this in Greensboro. We had another church call me, and the pastor of the church called and he said, I hear you go to Rwanda, Africa. And I said, yes, I've been 3 or 4 times at the time. He said, well, I've got a lady who's we've gotten to know. She's from Rwanda. She's a political asylee and needs lots of help. Can you help her? Because you know a little bit about Rwanda. We don't know anything. I said, sure. So I went and met Chantal. And Chantal is a remarkable woman, a believer, a political asylee. If you know anything about Rwanda's history, you might understand the context of that. And I said to Chantal, you don't have to come to our church. I'm not obligating you to show up at Church of the Redeemer, but we'll help your family. What can we do to serve you? And we began serving her family. She eventually shows up. She moved out of an apartment after about a year, and she said to me, there's a lot of folks like me in this apartment complex. Would your church show them the same kind of care you showed me? And I said, yes, we would. The following Sunday, there were 40 2 East Africans that showed up at our church the following Sunday, and a congregation of about 120 said to them, "We'll treat you like our family." People were driving these folks to doctor's appointments. They were meeting after school, helping their children with better English skills so they can make it in American culture. Some people donated money because they come from very little and they're in great need. In the United States, if someone immigrates to the U.S., legal immigration, used to they would give them a year of income. It's now scaled down to 90 days. Imagine that. Come, show up, move here. You have to pay us back for your travel cost to here, and we'll give you 90 days of income, and then you're on your own. We began the process of getting our lives dirty and messy and inconvenienced to serve the most beautiful people I've met. It changed our church. Overnight, Church of the Redeemer was vastly different. All of a sudden, very different faces in the room. And I once had a meeting with them, and I said, I just want you to know we're Anglicans, and we cannot clap, sing, and dance at the same time. We can try one of those 3. So don't hold that against us.
The right order.
And they taught us how to dance and clap and sing in our worship. They changed our church by us simply saying, we want to love like Jesus has taught us to love. So what does it mean for you in your locality to outlove your culture? To say to those around that you see, we want to have compassion on them. That'll be the basis of my sermon tomorrow, so just hang on for that. The last one is outlast. What I've been amazed at learning from brothers and sisters who come from other places with tremendous challenges, persecution and suffering, is the gift of perseverance, the gift of sticking to it. There was a woman who did a study in the United States a few years ago. She's a PhD. Her name is Angela Lee Duckworthy. You can Google her name. She did a study on why some students make it in the educational system and why some don't. And after years of research, a university paid for this. Wouldn't that be nice for once? After years of research, she concluded this, that those who actually make it in life have what's called grit. Does that word connect in English? In British English? Perseverance. A willingness to stick close to Jesus and trust him and believe him, even when circumstances are highly unfavorable. C.S. Lewis once said, those who accomplish much in this life do so when circumstances are unfavorable, because favorable circumstances rarely exist. This willingness to persevere and to press through and to not give up and to hold close to Christ through it all. That's what it means to outlast. So we are addressing these kinds of questions in our church, in our systems. How do we outlive our culture? How do we outthink our culture? How do we outlove our culture? And how do we outlast our culture? And something I cannot do for you is come give you those answers for you. It wouldn't be fair, it wouldn't be right, and they probably wouldn't be good answers. But I can give you the questions and say, what does this mean for you all in your circumstances now in this day? So let me open it up to questions or comments on these things.